Evening, folks. Hope you're having a wonderful start to your week. We had a big video on Monday, and today it's going to get no smaller because we are covering the Orks. Yes, if you like what I do, the subscribe button is down below. And if you really like what I do, then click the notification bell if you ever want to hear from me again. Because if you don't, then YouTube will not tell you that I'm here at all. Moving on. Today is a big one, but if you like what I do, also, go head over to Composite Games if you want to get your own Orks. They do a 5% discount at checkout if you use the promo code Northern Exile down below. Not only do you help them, but you also help me and the channel by getting models you're going to get anyway. And you keep them busy in this time of rising prices. Anyway, let's get into it. So, I've been looking forward to doing this one for quite a while. I'm not going to lie. We're coming to it at last. Them boys, right? The Orks. Rather than being controversial, I think the true tragedy of the Orks is that they are just there. And in being just there, they are a safe option to be the local punching bag by any force that is nearby. The Tyranids have a similar issue, and we'll get to those on Thursday, because there are going to be 2 lore videos this week, and the Tyranids will be on Thursday. The Orks, as a culture, simply live for war. They have almost nothing else. And whilst this is absolutely fantastic for memes and irritating man-children who like to shout the word "wah" at the top of their lungs at hobby stores to frighten the bejesus out of passing grandparents who came in to get little Timmy a set of aggressors, it's not that great for everybody else. For the record, I have a massive soft spot in my heart for Orks. A lot of my best games in 40k were played against Orks. I still have to regale you guys of the hobby nightmare of an apocalypse game played whilst I was at university, where our enemy became invisible using a spell. Yes, an apocalypse game where hundreds of Ork boys became invisible, but I will get into that another time. Regardless, most Ork players I have come across are hilarious and are simply there for the random fun, which is an almost too perfect effect of narrative harmony, as the spirit of Orks comes out in their best players, right? It just so happens, like most things in 40k, this is a double-edged sword. Let's have a little look at the Orks here, and see what makes them tick, what holds them back, and the weird, and I mean weird, rewrite addition I'll give to them later on. Stick around for that, it's probably the most ambitious one I've done yet. So the good first, as we always do the good first. Well, they're Orks in space, aren't they? That's a big positive right there and then. What more could you be after? The whole culture of the Orks is warfare. Everything they do and support pushes them to greater and greater extremes of not violence, but all-out attack. It's like their culture is designed as a festival of warfare, and everybody is invited. They're revealed to actually be weapons made by the Old Ones that have simply gone rogue since the fall of that ancient race, is a fantastic choice. The Orks are essentially a massive button that the Old Ones pressed to fight foes beyond imagining. Gods, if you will. We also have a great look into the past of the Orks, and that, in the past, they were far more noble and restrained than they are now, despite their brutality in combat as living weapons. Lest we forget the time where, the Orks actually signed peace treaties with humans back in the day, Yeah, that happened. Still, if you're going to have Orks in sci-fi, I think this is the way to go, and I'll get into this a little bit later on. Their characters are some of the best in 40k, in terms of their simplicity and drive. Ghazghkull is essentially the unofficial 40k poster boy at this point, as he embodies the spirit of the game, and simply wanting to watch things blow up spectacularly, and be ground into little fleshy pastes. He totally gets what it means to be an Ork. He has no grand designs on space empires or things. He wants to lead his people in a crucible of war that essentially lasts forever. The physiology of the Orks is a piece of beautiful writing that does not get enough love, in my opinion. Essentially, the more an Ork fights and wins, the larger and stronger they grow. It is literally almost like they believe they are bigger and stronger after winning, so they are. This leans into the lovely way the Orks interact and interplay with the warp. Essentially, the Orks are so simple-minded and totally dedicated onto their belief in intensity that whatever they believe in unison tends to come true. This is where you get the constant jokes of the Orks painting things red because they think red makes it go faster, and then it actually does. It's a brilliant bit of fourth wall breaking hilarity that actually fits into the lore. This is unfortunately ruined by a fan base, as most things are. So that's what I love about the Orks as well, is that they are a really simple video to do, because, let's be honest, all of their positive points can be rounded up in one or two simple sentences, or one or two simple paragraphs where you say, hey, this is what the Orks do, this is what they're good at, and this is what they like. A beautifully simple force on the tabletop and in lore. The same as the ogres. They're very, very similar in their style and their beautiful symmetry to the ogres, and that's why I like them so much. Let's jump into the bad, though, shall we? So, and here's where it gets a bit iffy. The Orks are basically torn down for a lot of folks I come across and speak to by how their lore makes their fans act in a hobby store. They are kind of like a reverse of Space Wolf players. Lovable, but really annoying instead of utterly dislikable, arrogant, and generally annoying, as the Space Wolves are. We've all been there, right? We've all been there. You are playing 40k and having a right laugh before hearing some idiot a few tables down let out a massive wah scream at the top of his lungs whilst crumbs of Doritos fly out of his mouth and onto his chin. Normally followed by some other mouth breather shouting something about a blood god or something on a few tables over. It sucks, as the Orks deserve a lot more love for how beautifully their lore clicks together, but the constant memes, Ork talking comments, and other points like this generally make those who could really love them roll their eyes and move on to the next army on the shelf when they're choosing one. There is nothing wrong with a little memery here and there, and I don't want to turn into the fun police here. A little celebration that genuinely makes people chuckle is fine, but the constant grind of it and the memery tends to wear the joke a little thin, guys. Here's the more major one that I dislike. The Orks are generally, as I said before, everybody's punching bag. Like the Avatar of Cain, or basically anything the Tyranids try to do, the Orks are simply there to be punched by Space Marines. No more, no less. Not that they care particularly, but it is always rather convenient to write a race that cannot lose as long as it's fighting. But we are all human beings with brains here, right? We know the Orks lost, and it grates on us. Ghazghkull being killed, quote-unquote, by Ragnar Blackmane is not just yet another sign of the Space Wolves getting away with stuff that makes no sense in the lore for the sake of the egos of their fans and their 5-year-old brains, but it's an insult to the lore itself. Ragnar is not even the big dog of the Space Wolves, and yet he takes out Ghazghkull? Are you shitting me right now? The greatest Ork there perhaps ever was, who has been fighting Yarrick for decades. Who really benefits from Ragnar killing him? The Space Wolves, and nobody else. And that's just how their fan base, and apparently Games Workshop, likes it. Yes, they retconned this after fans with actual brains told them what a ridiculous thing this was to do, but still, the attempt was made to ruin the legacy of one of 40k's original best boys for the sake of a single Space Marine chapter getting yet another win. Not only that, they gave this ridiculous win to the Space Wolves of all people. If you're an Ork fan, I hope you're ready to see them lose. A lot. A lot. Okay? There's only so much you can get away with. Hey, they're the Orks, right? Haha! You know, sometimes it starts to grate when we actually like the Orks and we want to see them win every now and again. Same goes for the Tyranids, right? Please, please, give us some balance. So what would I change? Right, well, on to this massive undertaking. One thing I have always loved about the Orks was the hidden nobility of their past, and so in my rewrite, I wanted to play with that and give the Orks another edge, whilst keeping the overall message of the Orks and what they bring to 40k by their sheer mean culture. So, if you're here to watch me rip down the Orks and build them up yet again from scratch, then you're in for a bit of a disappointment. I would only change two main things about the Orks in 40k as they are. Cup of tea there. The first, in our lore, the Orks are not basically plants. So, in the actual lore, they infest planets like a fungi, and they grow from underground. It's kind of silly. They do not infest worlds like they do in the real setting. Instead, we do have female Orks. And these Orks can produce many offspring, kind of like the Krogan in Mass Effect. Each Ork mother can produce like 1,000 tiny Orks a year that are birthed at a much smaller size than humans, but grow very quickly. This is a defect in the Ork genome, in that they grow quickly, but without the intervention of the Old One's technology and guidance, they are essentially 7-foot tall, green muscular children within a year of their birth. And so we have the Orks just as they are in the modern setting, but with this one change. I made it because I feel the spore thing takes all of the stakes out of a fight within the Orks. They have nothing to protect, they don't care about anything but fighting. And I want to give the savage Orks in the setting to have a little bit of a nobility at their core. That's how they were made, after all, by the Old Ones. And the second thing, whilst savage and brutal, Ork society is still society at large. They don't build empires, and instead fight to get stronger so that they can fight larger and larger things for the glory of Gork and Mork. They are essentially the Orks we know now and love, but they do circle the wagons a few times to protect their younger versions. They have a noble core that you can see just about, but they're still the Orks you know and love. Right, that's it for the normal Orks. Only those two changes. Alright? On to the more controversial part of the video. I want to create a splinter empire of the Orks that actually retained a lot of Old One technology. In fact, their god, who died a few thousand years ago now, is known as the Great Elder. We heavily hint that this was a lone, repentant Old One, perhaps the last of his race, buried deep within the desert world of Shenk. Right, you can put Shenk wherever you want. I've put it quite nearby to the Octarius War, or whatever it was called, where the Orks are fighting the Tyranids. I put it quite close to that, and that's how this Ork Empire is discovered. The Ork Empire that is above ground is known as the Shenk Empire, and has essentially grown into an interplanetary empire ruled by the Overlord of Shenk, essentially a Conan the Barbarian stand-in within the 40k universe. These Orks are the apex predators of this part of the galaxy, larger and more bronze/grey skinned than their green cousins. The Orks of the Shenk Empire, known as Orks, see what I did there, because I think the original Orks were called Orks in the setting by the Old Ones, are essentially what the Orks would have been if never separated from Old One control. They are a fully formed civilization, with art, advanced religious practices, and even emissaries that they send to the other worlds at the end of the 41st millennium. These Orks are essentially the epitome of the noble barbarian. Their culture is savage and violent. They are utterly honourable, though, and almost unstoppable when in a one-on-one situation. I would actually have them introduced into the lore in a short story where a Space Wolf great company lands onto the world of Shenk to answer the calls of the Orks, where they fight an honour duel with one of the leaders of the Ork kingdoms. Not the leader, but one of them. Whilst armoured in only combat pants, boots, and wielding a serrated combat knife, the Ork takes down the Wolf Lord, who is in full power armour with a chainsword, the lot. Now, I don't do this because I hate Space Wolves. I'm doing this to redress the balance. You touch Ghazghkull, well, the Orks gut you whilst dressed for the beach. This shows the power of the single Ork, and before long their small empire is expanding outwards, before finally the emergence of the Tyranids in that other war puts their plans of expansion on halt. This is essentially a stalemate, the irresistible force meeting an immovable object and all that. That is a fight that will go on forever. The Orks of the Schenk Empire act like 40k's version of Klingons, but with more nobility. They will stoop to piracy to protect their own people, but are more interested in meeting the enemy head-on. Their internal physiology, again, they were manipulated by the old ones to be like this. Their internal physiology can actively change to combat disease and infestation, and so the Tyranids have a very hard time infiltrating them with their gene stealer cults and the like. Everything about the Orks is essentially designed to ensure the enemy has to fight them on the battlefield to actually kill them. They're almost immune to disease and all that stuff. The original Orks from the 40k setting see these guys as their versions of Space Marines. Imagine the way a normal guardsman looks at a Space Marine. That's the relationship between most of the Orks and the Orks. The Orks, for their part, are extremely protective of the Orks as a whole, as they think the old ones failed most of their beautiful race, and so they are determined to protect them at all costs, leading them personally if need be. This does not go down well with Ghazghkull, as you might well expect, and he annihilates a lot of Ork champions just to show that yes, you may be the Orks perfected, but the strongest of us, as in me, can still tear you to bloody shreds. So, what does this do to the Orks? Well, one thing. The Orks of the Schenk Empire cannot do magic at all, and in fact are cut off from the warp. Okay? The old one, who was their god, designed them that way. He doesn't want Chaos to have any chance of corrupting these Orks. And so, they have a very little signature in the kind of like the Tau, they have very little signature in the warp. They can't use warp travel. So the Empire is very local, you know. But also, the Orks don't have any sort of the Orks don't have any sort of advantage over the Orks, because the Orks can still use their powers of self-belief to overpower an Ork if they want to. So yes, you know, red makes them go faster, things like that, right? Penning checkered things makes them go, you know, they still have this, the Orks originally still have this amazing self-belief that kind of gives them an edge over the Orks. The Orks don't believe in anything apart from their old one god, who is now dead. So they are essentially a very logical version of the Orks. They can't do magic, that they can't tap into that savage, brutal, but absolutely brilliant form of magic that the Orks can do. They just can't do it. So that is one major thing that the Orks have over Orks. Well, what this does is it gives you more tabletop options and miniatures. It files down the meme lord edges of the Orks if you want more noble savage Orks without taking away the fun of the original lads. It also means we have a fully tattooed up, mohawk sporting, chain blade wielding, bigger, more muscular, but more scarce version of the Orks running around. In lore, they are contained by not only their lack of spaceborne technology in warp travel, but also by the Tyranid menace, which, weirdly, just makes them far stronger as they gain experience in void warfare against an enemy that they can never truly beat. The Orks, beyond this, act like freebooters and freelancers, hiring out their services to any who will pay them so that they can send resources back to their homeworld and the fight against the Tyranids. More options are always good. Want more Orks? Want normal Orks? Go for it. Ghazghkull is waiting for you, just as the army that you know and love, but with more updated models. Want the new noble, low number and imperious duelist Orks? Go for it. You now have a wandering band of Ork heroes ready to throw down. And yes, they are the same army in the same codex, But of course, Games Workshop will probably nickel and dime you for this idea for profit, as they do. What do you think? Have I gone too far here? Have I gone beyond the pale in terms of making the orcs a more noble version of themselves, whilst trying to have my cake and eat it, and keep my lovely savage orcs as well? What do you think? Have I gone mad? Let me know in the comment section down below. On Thursday we will be doing Tyranids, and tomorrow we will be doing some more Hobby Nightmares. I love you all long time. Have a wonderful rest of your day and your evening. I will speak to you real soon. Have a good one. Bye now.